Welcome back to the 817 podcast. EJ and Jimmy here with special guests, the editors of the Fort Worth Magazine. We have Brian Kendall and Sam Kalimbahin, who recently wrote an article that got viral locally called 20 Ways to Make Fort Worth Even Better. And it's just a practical guide on what we can do as citizens to impact this beautiful place. And so we obviously don't get to every single thing that we can do, but I'm telling you, you have to read this article. We're going to have it in the description that you can click on and read, but we're going to dive in it with the editors and just get a really good deep discussion on which ones we see as most important, most timely, and some of our favorites. So let's dive into the show.
How did you get to Fort Worth, and what makes you passionate about the city?
I've been here for about 2 years, maybe a little bit over 2 years. I was actually in Dallas before, D Magazine. So I was across 360 West on the east side of 360, I should say. And, so I was over in the bougie town of Dallas, working for D Magazine. Not quite our competitor, but I know that they are in Fort Worth. I was a managing editor over there. Then I got kind of poached here in Fort Worth Magazine. And I've absolutely loved Fort Worth ever since I was in here. I mean, it's kind of a strange juxtaposition from Dallas. I mean, coming to Fort Worth, it's a little bit, it's very different. It's a little bit more, old hat, a little bit old school in their ways. You've got that Fort Worth way. Maybe I just wasn't as attuned to that in Dallas because I know it exists in every city.
Yeah.
But when I came here and I was the executive editor of a magazine, which I've never been before, which I know in itself carries a certain amount of you have to start going to these events. You have to start sort of rubbing elbows with these people at these jewel charity balls and things like that, which is totally fine. And these people do absolutely amazing things, but it was just a little jarring to me because it's not something that I'm normally used to, but Fort Worth in itself, I mean, I fell in love with certain parts of the city. Literally everybody I've met here has been just absolutely friendly. The other thing I've noticed about Fort Worth is the camaraderie here, the cooperation that you have between different businesses. So when I go to Craftwork, they don't necessarily talk shit. Sorry, am I allowed to say shit?
Yes, you can.
Sure.
Yep, you can say whatever you want.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I'll say shit away then. All right. So... they sort of enjoy each other. They won't sit and just completely trash like Sons of Liberty or Lazy Daisy Coffee. I mean, they enjoy working together. And Fort Worth, I think, is a very unique city out of all the places that I've lived because I come from a military family. So I've lived in literally 10 different cities. I've never quite seen, or maybe I just wasn't attuned to the fact that a city can be this cooperative, this much of a communal type atmosphere, which in itself is a juxtaposition from a city that traditionally speaking can be very conservative and very sort of dog eat dog as far as business is concerned. And maybe this is the younger business that we're talking about, but I was just so impressed with this willingness to share and this willingness to, be on board with other brands and other businesses who might be in the same field as them, because to them it was like, no, your success means our success, means the city's success, and that's what we're all after. And I had never quite seen that in any other place I'd ever lived. So my love affair for Fort Worth began very soon after I moved here, and I discovered that.
How's what was it like your Dallas friends when you told them you were going to Fort Worth? Were they like, yikes? Like, it's honestly like when I so if I get into like an airport, like if I land in a DFW and like an Uber picks me up and I show them that I'm going to Fort Worth rather than Dallas, like, oh, I never go this way. And then like sometimes they'll be like, oh, I'm from Dallas and I've been to New York more than I've been to Fort Worth. And so what does your Dallas friends tell you when you said, hey, I'm moving to Fort Worth? Were they like, ooh? Or were they like, cool?
Well, first of all, I love your assumption that I have friends in Dallas and that I make friends wherever I go. I appreciate that. But I actually do have Dallas friends. And Dallas sort of has a strange thing where they just don't care about anybody else, I feel like. I mean, when I do say Fort Worth, I mean, they'll come here every now and then and they'll say, oh, yeah, the stockyards are cool. Or, oh yeah, so you're going over there. Will you buy a pair of spurs and start riding a horse to work? I mean, that is kind of the perception that they have of Fort Worth. And of course, here I am, and I feel like I've become an ambassador of the city. And I'm like, oh no, you don't understand. It's so much more than that. Like, you've got to try out all these different places. You've got to go to the near south, you know, you've got to try out Riverside. You got to, you know, these are such amazing areas. And not only are they great areas, but unlike Dallas, where I feel like sometimes I don't mean to talk too poorly about Dallas, because I do love that city in so many ways. But that sort of more welcoming atmosphere is in Fort Worth. You go into a coffee shop and they don't just make your latte and give it to you. I mean, they like to chat with you. They want to become friends with you. They take time to make a swan latte art and show it to you and chat it up with you. So it's just a much more friendly atmosphere, I've noticed. And maybe it's just got more of that Western Southern charm. It's almost just like as soon as you cross that, like Highway 360, it is a complete change. I mean, I know people like to lump Dallas and Fort Worth together and call it DFW. I like to say DFW is the airport. We have nothing to do with Dallas. I was actually on a trip recently in Mexico, and I told them that I was working for Fort Worth Magazine, and they literally said, is Fort Worth a suburb of Dallas?
Ouch.
And they were like, what is it? It's a suburb, right? And I'd explain to them, no, we have like 1 million people living in this city. And not only do we have 1 million people living in this city, but if you go to Dallas and then you go to Fort Worth, you would think that they are 2,000 miles apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, whenever somebody talks about the Metroplex, I always say it's probably 2 cities together in a Metroplex. I don't know if it's just this country or the world. You will not find 2 cities with more of a like contradictory kind of atmosphere. And I hate to use the word juxtaposition because I use it all the time. That's my favorite word, but there is a juxtaposition going on in the Metroplex. And I think it's just so cool.
Now, anything you write going forward, I'm going to take a note of how many times you use juxtaposition, whether it's in your columns or something else.
It's a minimum of a dozen times each issue.
Well, Sam, I know we haven't got your story, and I would love your kind of introduction as well.
So my story, I'm from Arlington. I've grown up in the DFW area my whole life, never left, never moved anywhere, never came from anywhere. My parents came here from the Philippines in the 90s. So I always get confused if I'm like first generation or whatever it's called, but I was basically one of the first kids that was born here in the U.S. And so I grew up here all my life. So I feel very Texan for sure. Like when people ask, where are you from? Like my first thoughts, not typically Philippines, even though I feel like it's what they want me to say. I always say I'm from Texas or from Arlington. And so I came to Fort Worth. I always felt like I have a foot in Fort Worth and in Arlington because my dad, has worked here for several years. He's a physical therapist. So he's worked here. He's gone to school at, because my dad's also a pastor. So he also went to school at Southwestern Seminary. So we were always coming out to Fort Worth. My grandma had a business here. So I had so many ties to Fort Worth as a kid, and we came here pretty often. Growing up. And it wasn't until I went to TCU, which go Frogs, by the way. I went to TCU, and that was kind of my first dip into like Fort Worth and like the real like Fort Worth culture. Cause TCU is, a really big school out here. Football is so huge out here. And that was kind of my first dip into what Fort Worth as a city was kind of at its heart. And I didn't even get deeper into it until, my first job. So it's funny because I studied journalism at TCU. They always said, be prepared to move to a small market. You might be working in like Sherman or Amarillo or somewhere along those lines when you get your first job in journalism. And I applied to all those places. I applied to all those small markets. and the door just wasn't really open there for me. No one was, I wasn't really getting any callbacks, or no one gave me any offers there. And then all of a sudden, an opportunity showed up at the Fort Worth Business Press, which is a business newspaper here in Fort Worth. And they were the ones who actually called me and said, hey, would you like to come write for us? And so my first job ended up being here in Fort Worth, in a big city, for, I believe, a weekly newspaper was what they were then. I don't know if they're still weekly now, but that's what I did when I first got out of college. And it was there that I started getting out of like that TCU bubble, and now actually talking to the entrepreneurs in the city, business leaders. Like I interviewed Mayor Betsy Price, and like really just expanding my boundaries, knowing what Fort Worth is and who the people are here. And then, of course, just that love became even deeper when I came to Fort Worth Magazine, because now by the time I got here to the magazine, like I knew a lot of people and I was building relationships with people. And being here at Fort Worth Magazine for the past 4 years, it's like I have seen so many stories that I covered maybe 2 or 3 years ago that have now either grown or like come to fruition, or like I think of like you, Jimmy, with the Granbury Theater. I remember when we covered that, like, okay, they have this idea of doing a theater. That's great. And like now to see it actually open, and like to see people going there, and you guys like thriving even during the pandemic. It's just been so cool to kind of see Fort Worth's story over the past few years, and how the story keeps getting written, and, you know, the city just keeps on growing and the businesses keep on growing. And it's like, by now I'm starting to feel a little bit more planted here. Just being part of Fort Worth Magazine and being able to cover all of y'all's stories. And that's basically where I am right now, just still here covering the city, enjoying learning more about the city every day, enjoying writing these crazy articles with Brian. So yeah.
Sam, you probably have one of my favorite Instagram accounts, because you are constantly going to and patroning different small businesses. And I feel like if anybody wanted a glimpse into where should I go support today that I've never gone before, if they ventured through your Instagram stories, they would find a lot of great places. So I appreciate that you do that, and I love following it around and seeing you, because I feel like just things like that make it a huge difference towards creating this.
Yeah, as long as you're willing to sift through all the Baby Yoda and Star Wars content that kind of goes in between all that. So
that's up your alley, right there.
Yeah, I got no problem with that.
Nobody complains about that, Sam.
Yeah. Well, cool. I would love to hear what the inspiration for this article is. And Brian, I feel like your intro to the piece, your editor's column, I think painted a really great picture of something that we've talked about, which is people in Fort Worth love the city so passionately. And we sort of look at it and go, I want to fix some things, but I don't really know how to do it. And so we would love to hear the inspiration for the article and how y'all got to 20 things and just what all went into making this happen.
So, I mean, the major inspiration behind this was trying to get the city to get involved. I will actually backpedal and give you a little bit of history behind this, because it is kind of interesting. So, you know, before all of the George Floyd, killing murder happened, we were sort of in this weird, how do we cover this? What do we do? I mean, we are the city magazine. We don't normally, we do dive into civics a little bit. Civics a little bit. And, but we're always very careful. We're always very cautious, because we don't want to ruffle any feathers. We understand who our demographic is. But Sam and I both felt a need to actually engage our audience in civics and become sort of a springboard for education for these people who, there's no doubt. I mean, everybody in the city understands that our readership are primarily middle-aged, older, affluent people. And the majority are women. This is just, for better or worse, this is just our audience. These are the people who typically read our magazine. And I thought, are these the people who should be knowing these things? aren't these the people who we should be reaching? So Samantha and I very much took the approach that we were kind of going to double down on the civics that we were going to be publishing in the magazine. And luckily, thanks to my typical procrastination when it comes to getting stuff in, we were actually able to pivot far more quickly than any other city magazine. Because most city magazines, they plan their editorial out months and months in advance. And there's very little that they can do to change things.
Yeah.
Because I procrastinate, I'm like, hey, I don't even have this story in. Why don't we do this instead? So we were actually one of the first city magazines to do an entire magazine related to COVID. Mm-hmm. And then later on, just a couple months later, we did this magazine that you guys are talking about, where it's a very civic-minded magazine. Much of it, yes, it's because of George Floyd, and it's because of the protests and things going on around, Breonna Taylor and things like that. So there's very little doubt about that. And it is something that's not just affecting the city, but the nation as a whole. This magazine, the September issue, was initially supposed to be a cover of somebody who shall not be named. But at the time, we thought this makes absolutely zero sense for this person to be the cover of the magazine, given everything that's going on. So we thought, who would be a good cover of the magazine? Who is the person right now who's under the most fire, who can answer these really tough questions? And the first thing that came to my mind was Betsy Price. She's the one who's really kind of in the midst of all of this. She's the one who's making a lot of very hard decisions. And so we decided that Betsy Price should be the cover. My publisher came to me, Hal Brown, and he said, I love the idea of Betsy Price being on the cover, but I want you to give me another option. So I was sort of that night and literally needed it the next morning. And I was thinking, like, I need to think of something quick, and something, kind of a lightning bolt of inspiration and epiphany. And I just thought, ways to make Fort Worth better. The number I initially had was 21, by the way. I was like, I want it to be 21 because I'm a number guy and I love odd numbers. So I was like, 21 ways to make Fort Worth better. That just sounds so much cooler. 20, and nobody's going to pay attention to that. So 21, that was the number that we initially decided on. And then all of a sudden, when I had thought of that, I was like, well, no, this is the main article. I mean, even though it wasn't my initial idea, and it was just sort of more of a subsequent idea, it was something that I decided was extremely important and something that we should do anyway.
Yeah.
So myself, Samantha, Scott, the editorial department decided we have to do both stories, and they're both extremely relevant to this time. So, and all of this, by the way, happening within a month of press. So again, we're a magazine that normally tries to work out months in advance, but because of everything that was going on, we had no choice but to make this decision literally just 4 weeks before. So here we are trying to find these 21 ways to make Fort Worth better. And we're calling people, we're talking, amongst us editors, talking to city leaders, civic leaders, and people who are just influencers and, Megan Henderson, for instance. I mean, people who just know the city really well, know what we can do to improve the city. So in the end, we ended up landing on these 21 ways. We wound up killing one way.
But you did have 21? You did have 21?
I'm sorry, what?
You did have 21?
We did have 21 and we had to kill one.
So are you able to share what that one was?
Yeah, I can tell you which one. It was making it easier to open up restaurants. And the reason we killed that was because I didn't think it made sense with the rest.
Yeah, I think that's, as soon as you say that, I'm like, I 100% agree. But I do also really agree with you that it does stand out as really different from the other 20.
Right.
And it's less action oriented for people.
Exactly. Even though it's something that we heard from people we interviewed and talked to, they were like, there's a lot of red tape with restaurants. I think that in itself would improve the city. But then when we looked at it and saw the kinds of things that we were coming up with, it just didn't match. It didn't mesh with I'm not going to put easier to open restaurants with embrace, don't be scared of, or merely tolerate our city's growing diversity. That didn't feel right. I didn't like that. Maybe that article's for another time. But really the inspiration behind it was not just educating Fort Worthians on way to make the city better, but also what you can do to get off your ass and improve the city yourself. And we also wanted to let Fort Worthians know the city isn't just sitting on their hands not doing anything. They are doing a lot, and the article hits on a lot of those points. Can they be doing more? Absolutely. But people also need to be aware that the city itself is aware, and that they are taking some proactive measures to improve the city.
Yeah.
And just to add to that too, obviously, if you look at the article, each bit that we have is probably about like 150, 200, maybe max 300 words. And I think the obvious thing is that each of these topics really just scratches the surface of all the deeper things that are happening in education, public transportation, equity. That was one of the toughest things that Brian and I went through as we were writing this, because we literally had hours and hours of interviews with so many people. And so much of it had to be condensed into maybe a couple of paragraphs. And so I think what we were hoping with this article was that it would inspire the people that are reading it to really dig deeper into what they're passionate about, what strikes them the most. And again, just like the theme throughout the article is just to get involved and to learn and to be educated. So.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And y'all obviously start out the article on probably, I would say, the most relevant of these things, which is to reverse Fort Worth's abysmal voter turnout. And how do we start with changing so many of these things or getting involved? And that starts with voting. So I love that y'all started with that, because it sets the tone of like, here's step one, and the other 19 steps only happen if you will take the initiative to go out and vote.
Tarrant County has in many ways done their part to try to make it as easy as possible to vote. I mean, we do talk a lot about voter suppression, which is a major issue, but Tarrant County has actually gone above and beyond to try to make it very, very easy for people to vote. You no longer have these voting stations where you have to go to, right? Mm-hmm. Now you can literally vote in any precinct. So, and also they try to make people aware, at least poll workers do, okay, this precinct has a line that's like 30 people out the door. Go to this one. It's literally 2 blocks away. So there's just no excuse anymore. And I think part of the big problem too, and it touches on this in the article, is that there's just not enough marketing done to let people know this. There's not enough voter education to say, look, it's not that hard to vote. It's very easy. So, I mean, for whatever reason, the statistic was like the median age of Fort Worth voters is 66 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, are you serious? And by the way, we're the second youngest city in Texas, second youngest. You know who the youngest is? Dallas. The 2 youngest cities in Texas have the worst voting percentage.
Well, and that's crazy because there are a lot of woke people on the internet that will not leave the internet to go make their actual voice heard. You would think with just a lot of the trends that we see online that would translate into something as simple as voting, but it really doesn't, which is crazy. And even in Tarrant County, if you sign up to be a poll worker, like you get paid, I think it's about $150 a day. Like, there are no young people out there volunteering or getting paid to be poll workers. Like, you walk into any polling place and you expect to see 65, 66-year-olds sitting there waiting to help you out. Like, not only can we turn around just young people voting, but young people volunteering at the polls, getting paid to, just stand there and help people vote. Yeah. Like, that's an easy thing. That's an easy thing, and something that could set a huge trend in Tarrant County.
Do you think it has to do with like Dallas and Fort Worth are just so bad from a national scale because we're all just like, oh, Texas is red, so like it's red, like that's who we are, that's what we do, and so we just don't really care civically.
Well, I think that used to be the case, but all statistics are pointing out that Texas is very purple now. I mean, in the upcoming election, it's very obvious that every vote is going to count. I mean, this is a very tight race between the two presidential candidates. And I'm not going to sit here and like support one or the other, but it's very obvious in this election, everybody's vote counts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you truly can make a difference. And I will say this, Tarrant County has been long considered the bellwether of Texas. Mm-hmm. Where Tarrant County goes, the state goes. I would say that Tarrant County's votes matter more than any other county in Texas.
I mean, maybe I don't think it's crazy to even say any other county in the country. Like,
yes, at this point, you're right.
Like, truly
largest Republican urban county, right?
Yeah.
Like, so, I mean, if we're on the fence, if we're purple, that plays a big.
I mean, we went blue for Beto, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
it can happen.
Yeah, but even more than the presidential election, I saw a really great video online about how everyone gets super fired up about when we have a presidential election, but there's so many other elections that happen in between. And I think that also plays into how people don't really participate is because they're not really that educated on what's happening, at the city level or at the state level. That stuff kind of gets ignored. And then when all of a sudden there's a big national election that, everyone starts saying, let's go vote, let's go do this. But I think the next challenge after the presidential election is, telling the young people, let's pay attention to what's happening in the government throughout the 4 years, again, at the local and at the state level. And I hope, hopefully this article also is sort of that gateway into getting involved on a more micro level.
Yeah. And I'll piggyback off that, Sam. I mean, the most important elections that you can vote in, because they do have the most impact on your life, truly, are local elections, not national elections. Yeah. So voting on council people, voting on, in any sort of city jobs, I mean, local judges. I mean, these are the elections that really have by far the most impact on us individually. So, yes, I agree with what Sam said, and the article goes into that as well. It's not just the national elections, it's not just the presidential elections, it's not just the midterm elections. We need to pay attention to all the propositions coming up and all of the local seats being filled. That is extremely important. There shouldn't be an election, whether it be local or national, that people are sitting at home on their asses.
Yeah. No, that's a great word. I mean, 20 minutes before we started, we're talking about how the last mayoral election in Fort Worth was decided by 5,000 votes with, 6% of the population showing up. If 7% of the population show up, like, who knows how that changes the dynamic. But that's a very tangible thing that with a person that we see touch our lives on a week-to-week basis that you could have a say in that you may not be doing right now.
I mean, all of these things, I can literally look at, 18, 19 of these things, and they in some way affect equity.
Yeah.
So to me, voting was important, but the key to this entire thing was equity. And there are so many studies and so much proof that when a city embraces that, and when they are proactive in trying to improve a city's equity, not only does it just, in general, improve the city and just make it maybe a friendlier place to live.
Yeah.
But if I'm talking to somebody who just cares about numbers, bottom line, it improves the economics of a city.
Yeah.
We will grow if we actually embrace these things. So it's not as if it's something that's like anti-capitalist in any sort of way. These are things that really do help a city.
Yeah.
And I think, so one of the people that we also interviewed, I believe Brian interviewed, was Estris Tucker. And one of my favorite things that he says in our article is that Fort Worth is not newly diverse. And Fort Worth really, for, generations has had a really vibrant African-American population, really vibrant Hispanic heritage here. And so it's just one of those things that it's like, yes, we're talking about all these things right now, but the truth is all of these things have been around even before the past 10 years. And it's just something that Fort Worth needs to continually embrace, is that diversity and all the different cultures here. And just the fact that, we call ourselves the city of cowboys and culture. And it really is. And it's really this, I'm going to steal one of Brian's words, juxtaposition. But at the same time, it's a juxtaposition that we can't embrace. We can't embrace, the cowboy culture, and we can't embrace like the new Fort Worth that we're seeing growing all around us. And I think Fort Worth, too, is very much open to that. And of course, we're not perfect, and there's so many different things that can improve. But one of the things I think that's just so great about our city is just the fact that we are willing, for the most part, to talk about these things and to see what ways we can work together to get better.
Yeah, for sure. We, so the Star Telegram just had their article come out about 76104. And I think that if you haven't read it, it's about how that zip code, although it is directly across the street from the hospital district, is really a wasteland for medical care and for quality food, and how that's led to it having the lowest life expectancy of any zip code in Texas. And I feel like that really lines up with what y'all are saying with this, of when we take the time to invest in the communities that need it the most and have typically been neglected, and look for that equity, then the whole city grows with that. It's not about trying to better the people at the top, but when we come in and support the people that we can see need that support, it makes the whole community better.
Right.
Yeah, I think a lot of investment too, and we've seen the growth in places like the near South Side, obviously, which is one of the huge big turnarounds in just the past 5-10 years, how much the city has invested in the near South Side. You're starting to see that a little bit on the East Side. Some more new businesses popping up around there, but it would be really great to start really seeing that same energy that we saw on the South Side really spread out to different areas, whether it be, the East or West Fort Worth, or of course everything's growing in North Fort Worth as well. Mm-hmm. Just really seeing that same energy in other parts of the city.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would love to know,
while embracing affordable housing.
Yes, yes, exactly. Like, how do we take the blueprint from the near South Side and replicate it in a way that allows for affordable housing and keeps gentrification from happening in those areas?
Exactly, because I am a firm believer, and I don't think this is too idealistic of me, that can coexist. I think it's very easy for it to.
Is there any other kind of pieces? I know we kind of hit some of the bigger parts that makes the article really meaningful, but any of the other ones that you think would are some of your favorites that you think we should be focusing on outside of the equity and the voting that you think you want to hit on?
One of the things that really stood out to me personally was it was about education, supporting public schools, and how right now what the schools are dealing with is virtual learning. Obviously, that's a huge deal, but not just that. People are having a hard time learning virtually by nature of they just don't have access to Wi-Fi, which I think is huge, because that's just something that we don't really normally think about. Like, we pick up our phone, we get on Instagram, and it's just a thing that you kind of assume everybody has. But the truth is, and as the schools have discovered during this time, not everybody has access to something as simple as you think you would find, which is Wi-Fi. And the woman that I interviewed had mentioned how she was seeing kids working outside of the school or outside of the library just so that they can get some sort of signal. And I think just little things like that you don't think about, people deal with, but it's something that's very real in Fort Worth. And the practical thing that you can do is to just help donate to schools or help, the IT line. It felt something that's very practical, because we can talk about all of the issues in education like all day long. There's just so much that we can delve into, but I felt it was really important, especially during this time, to focus on that very, very specific issue, just because, again, it's just something that you don't think about. And it almost just makes you grateful that if you have access to Wi-Fi or the internet, it's something that we really should all be grateful for, because, again, not everyone is as fortunate.
Yeah. I really wonder what the cost for Fort Worth to have free public Wi-Fi everywhere in the city limits would be for like an annual cost. I feel like that is a line item that would be worth investing in.
The one that sort of struck me was the buying into higher density. Obviously, there is this massive city sprawl going on in Fort Worth with Alliance, and that can never be contained, and we completely understand that. I mean, the suburbs, they exist; they're here to stay. People love it; they're comfortable there. And I don't think anybody has anything against that, but it's sort of this lack of embrace of this new urbanization that's going on in Fort Worth, and this idea of building up rather than out. And one of the reasons why that is just so important is because when you build out, the city's resources are spread so thin.
Yeah.
So whether it be, utilities or fire department, police, obviously there's this new kind of, there's a lot of talk going on right now, especially from city leaders, about wanting to bring the city in and creating these more urban communities. And you see it in the near South Side, you see it in the cultural district, you see it downtown. And I think just trying to get people to embrace that is extremely important. And making Fort Worth a far more walkable place, also making it more of a tourist destination in that sense. So, I think that density where Fort Worth, we're there, but I feel like we're running a little bit behind other cities. I think Dallas is years ahead of us there, places like Seattle, Portland, places like Austin, these are places that have really embraced this, and they embraced it a long time ago. Fort Worth is just now kind of getting on that boat, but I'd love to see more of it, and I know that the city itself would as well. The city planners are really gung-ho about this, and I can see why, because they really do see it as a way to grow the city.
Yeah, and the perspective that I see for where Fort Worth is at with that, like, I 100% agree. That's the first one I wrote down as like, oh, I am like so behind this. But when people try to do change of uses and they have to go to city council, like recently for another boutique hotel going along Camp Bowie where Ginger Man was, people from the neighborhood are complaining about potential higher traffic for a 25-room hotel. Like, that is 25, maybe 50 cars going down Camp Bowie over the course of a day max, and that's something we're concerned about. And so that's one thing that I look at and I'm like, oh, like that feels like a gigantic mountain to climb as far as changing the mindset in Fort Worth. Yeah. But I think a thing that goes hand in hand with that is investing in public transportation, because when you feel like the city is more walkable or you can get around easy with public transportation, maybe you don't have a car or maybe you don't use your car very often. And so it counterbalances that potential increase in traffic or in car density, because people are saying, no, like, that's a three quarters of a mile of a walk. Like, I'm going to make that walk. It's easy. It's pretty. Like, I'm going to do that instead.
Yeah. So I would love to go ahead, Brian.
Well, I was just going to say, it sort of goes back to, the kind of thing that you're hitting on right there. It sort of goes back to my editor's note, the opener, where it's like people love the city so much, and they, in many ways, they think it's perfect, and they don't want to see it change. Yeah. and having an additional 50 cars going down Montgomery Avenue just all of a sudden pisses them off for some reason, and they refuse to embrace the change. So the biggest obstacle in all of this is getting people to embrace that change.
Yeah. And I think what's funny is, actually, I would argue like that was one I was probably not like super gung-ho about. And maybe this is my small town Texas coming in for me. I grew up in Burke Burnett, Texas, 2 hours north of Wichita Falls. 5,000 people, one blinking red light. And a part of me that I think what makes, like, I was like saying, and this was pre the magazine, is like a lot of Texas cities aren't really that walkable. I mean, I know all my friends in Houston who feel like, oh yeah, it's 45 minutes away. Yeah, we'll go. I'll see you over there. You're like, cool. Yeah. And so I think like a lot of Texas is really spread out. And I think a part of like, as a new home buyer, like my kind of frustration was like literally like West Magnolia is like the only place where you could get house and some grass. And it's still not a lot of grass in hindsight. So it's like, right. So when when we moved the east side, that was part of the benefit, was like a little bigger house, a little bit of grass. And a part of my fear with this, like this conversation of density, it's like, I think like maybe it's like the conspiracy theory of just playing in my mind of like, but that's also benefit for the real estate investor. Cause if I can get you into smaller, then I can make more money. I can make more, put more on more land. And so I don't know. I don't know if I'm fully convinced, and I would love to more research, more data. Yeah. Cause I also see in COVID and all this, like all these high density places are now looking to come to Texas so they can have space, for they can have less density. And so I'm interested to see y'all's thoughts on that one.
Yeah. I mean,
I guess
no, you go ahead, Brian.
I was just going to say the biggest argument, and I completely understand what you're saying, by the way. I mean, everybody likes a big house with a big yard, but at the same time, I think one of the reasons why one would sort of push back on that, especially if they're a city leader, is the fact that you are spreading thin city resources. And if we're all in on this together, which we are, totally. We want Fort Worth to be better. We need to consider that as a collective unit and say, how are we going to be more efficient using our resources as a city? And the only way to do that is for this new urbanization.
Yeah.
And I would say, Arlington Heights, Monticello,
totally.
They're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Those aren't going to be replaced by high-rise apartments.
Totally.
That space is there, and it's not going to change. And so maybe even a benefit of Fort Worth being a little bit slower on the trigger to embrace higher density is that we have almost like these built-in barriers to help avoid it and contain that into certain areas to make that investment and that transition a little bit easier, as opposed to, when you drive into the skyline of Dallas and you're like, oh my gosh, this goes for 1,000 miles. I can't see anything behind it.
Yeah.
It goes back to our conversation about diversity, about how there's so many different neighborhoods in Fort Worth with so many different characters. And I think, the character has changed, especially in the downtown cultural district, South Side area for sure. But there's still, the West Side, the East Side, so many places that I think Fort Worth needs to be really careful about making sure that, yes, let's build and grow these areas and make them, quality places to live, but also not lose that heart and lose that character of what that place originally was. So it's definitely a balancing act for sure.
Yeah,
totally.
We appreciate y'all doing this. Do y'all want to stay on for us to each talk about one that we were really passionate about?
Absolutely. Please do it.
All right, I'll go first.
Sure.
The one that really hit me, and it might have been the timing of reading this after spending 5,200 miles on the road, visiting 12 national parks, was create more green spaces. And not just green spaces, but usable green spaces. And every, city or town that we stopped in along our drive, had these beautiful parks with trees and places to sit. And I feel like it mentions in the article, obviously, the Trinity Trail and specifically the area around Trinity Park gets so busy because, one, it's the nicest space. Two, it's one of the only spaces along the entire Trinity that has trees over it, so you can actually go, run, bike there, and be out of the sun for a lot of it, as opposed to when we cross the bridge to go walk through Gateway Park and walk towards downtown. You're in direct sun the entire time. It's not that fun 3/4 of the year. And so that was one that I read, and I was like, oh, I feel this so much. Because while Fort Worth does have so much open land, a lot of it has become parks, but they're not parks that really are usable a lot of the year when it's 100 degrees outside in direct sun.
Yeah, I think that's like the part of like what makes like I think everyone gets so excited about Austin because it like, oh, they always say, oh, there's like nature in the city, but I feel like we can man make something. I don't know when or how, and it's going to take some inspiration and some design, but we definitely have the space in the river,
and it goes along with the river one also.
Yeah.
Like 90% of the Trinity River is basically unusable through Fort Worth, but obviously with the Panther Island development, whatever happens with that, like there could be opportunity there, but I would love to see the river get better use and just like getting involved with how to help make our parks better.
Yeah, and I think even on a smaller scale, you've got like that Fire Station Park, right?
Totally.
Near South Side, and you've got some other smaller parks kind of popping up here and there. And even that, I mean, just being something that people can go to and hang out with their dog, and sit on a bench underneath a tree, that in itself, I think would be such a great addition to the city. Not just from a standpoint of just, an open green space, but it does so much for the character.
Yeah.
And it makes it a place where people would want to live. And also even green spaces in itself, I think is an equity problem where you have people actually, because like the Fire Station Park and things like that, those weren't necessarily city founded or there wasn't investment from the city to do that. Those were donors who put that in place in areas that, quite frankly, are largely gentrified and white. And you don't see that necessarily in places like Como, in places that aren't gentrified, aren't majority white. So there needs to be a definite, I think a lot of I don't know what the word I'm looking for here is, but the emphasis put on finding green spaces for places where socioeconomically they're not on the same level, and you don't have that. You just don't. So it's an equity issue as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think you guys definitely hit all the ones that I would have said. And again, I'm just super thankful that you guys jammed with us for a little bit and allowed us to do this. I mean, we're really excited for just the work that you guys are doing. And I mean, if I guess I had to say one, I mean, I would look at maybe Back the Arts, but I think we're and I guess more I look at that in maybe the music scene way. Like obviously we have like Leon Bridges and Abraham Alexander coming up and all this kind of stuff. But I think like if you look at the hub of what makes places people want to live, I think we're definitely in this like micro niche, double down on who you are kind of era where people want to live in like Nashville, Austin, like these places that are very eclectic, New Orleans, I guess. Like, and so I think for us, I think our arts and our history around the arts, with country music all the way to like this soul funk history that we have. But then we also have, honestly, a lot of people don't realize this, a crazy hip hop scene in Stop Six and Como. Like, I mean, if you get on Panther City Propaganda and just watch these music videos and these stories of these kids, I mean, they got a little following. And so I think we have a lot of really strong arts. If we get Fortress Fest kind of rocking again, I think that could play a big part. And it kind of just also goes with having the green space and the capacity to really throw bigger outdoor events that people can come travel to.
On that note, I will go ahead and plug an amazing article that Sam wrote in our February issue on the Fort Worth hip hop scene. So please check it out.
Oh, wow. I'm jealous that I haven't seen this.
Yeah.
That's February. Yeah. And it's really interesting, and like, not to go on a tangent about that, but it's interesting to see how much the city and like the organization here, Fort Worth, which I'm sure that y'all are familiar with, has really leaned into Fort Worth hip hop. And I really loved, the organization, how they, even though they at that time didn't know much about the Fort Worth hip hop scene, they were able to sort of, I guess, not that they were prideful, but almost swallow their pride and say, okay, we don't know much about this. We want to learn about it. And that's how they got in touch with like Lou Charles and were really able to dig deeper into more of Fort Worth's hip hop artists. But it's just so fun, like Fort Worth's diversity. I know we keep going back to that in general, but just the impressions that people once had about Fort Worth and what it was. And then when you actually get to know the people and get to know all the cool things that people are doing around here, it's such a multifaceted city.
Yeah, I think like I asked you what your 21 was because I had like a 21, and my 21 was connect someone with an idea with someone who's looking for ideas, in the sense of, we're the 13th biggest city, but we're the 40th city when it comes to venture deals and backing startups. And so we're actually really underperforming in that kind of space. But yet I think we have this like health science center, biomedical kind of industry. We're really investing there. So I think we're having a lot of these ideas. And I think that's like that third angle after you have like culture, commerce, and like that tech kind of scene that I think it's probably our biggest hole right now. So like making people more aware that we actually have tech entrepreneurs in this space, I think it would be good for more people to know that.
Well, that was a big miss. I should have crowdsourced you. Dang it.
Hey, no, I actually learned that data from another podcast, Innovate Fort Worth. Cameron Cushion was his name, but I'll send over that data over there. But I recently just heard about it. I was like, oh, so maybe that's why I thought about it. I was like, I wish people. So it was a good data and story that they were sharing on their podcast.
Yeah, there's actually, there is quite a bit that Fort Worth, when you have organizations like Tech Fort Worth and Accelerate DFW, which I'm sure that you're also familiar with too, that they're doing. And I didn't even realize that UNT Health Science Center had such a big involvement in Fort Worth entrepreneurship. So it's really cool.
Yeah, actually, since this article was published, I realized we probably could have expanded this list to about 58, but we only had so much space. So
571.
There you go. No, but I enjoyed these. These were very, very exciting. And again, I had a lot of friends share it as well.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Thank you guys for hopping on with us and doing this, and for pivoting and publishing an article like this that allows people to understand how to get involved. That's really our heart behind doing this, is to help people be more informed and more involved. And so to see this come out was really exciting for us, and it just makes us really passionate about what's coming in the city.
Definitely.
Great. Thank you guys so much.
Thank y'all.
Yeah, it was great chatting with you guys too.
Yeah, you too. We'll talk to you soon.
Swipe, dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe, follow us, likes, double tap. Now they control your life, control your